Okay, so one of the big things I'm really interested in at the moment is how emotions and trauma, so past experiences, affect our thinking and our decision making, into the future. And I came across this clip by Jordan Peterson, and he speaks about how when you're doing psychotherapy with a psychologist, psychotherapist, what you want to do to, I guess, transcend or remove yourself from those unconscious decisions and things that are holding you from a past traumatic experience is to go back into that experience and essentially kind of like devise a plan so that if something like that were to happen again, you would know what to do, and I guess you won't be held back by your past. So I'm going to play you some of the snippets that I like from this clip, and then we'll talk about it a little bit further.
You go back into the memory and you assess the sequence of events in detail until they have an account that is sufficiently plausible so that they believe that if the same circumstances arose in the future, they would no longer fall prey to that error.
Okay, so what he's talking about here essentially is the idea that we can move on. If something happens that is similar to that past experience, we'll know what to do, because those thoughts in our minds are just trying to think of things that we can do so that we won't be subject to something like that, like a crazy line. Or I think what he talks about here is his, someone who gets cheated on by a spouse. They didn't expect it. It's very traumatizing, as it obviously would be.
If it's a naive person who was manipulated badly by a potential romantic partner, then what you do is you say, okay, well, look, what was it about your viewpoint that put you at risk? Now, that isn't blaming the victim. It's helping the victim not be a victim again. It's like, yeah, it was 95% the other person's fault, man. Whatever. They're not in the room with you. All you can do is try not to fall into the same pit. That doesn't mean someone else didn't dig the pit.
We can play the victim card, and more or less we are the victim a lot of the time to just how difficult life can be. The person isn't in our lives anymore, but we're still left with this suffering of what happened to us. And it doesn't matter, as he says, whose pit it was. The fact is, we now have to get over it. And David Goggins said a very similar thing on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he said that, I had a rough upbringing, and lots of shit happened to me that wasn't necessarily my fault, but it doesn't matter, because now he had to deal with it and then move on from that. And we can continue to blame and it's very, very fair that we do, but it doesn't get us anywhere. It doesn't get us out of the past so that we can start living in the present and in the future.
Okay, so, I was too trusting. Okay, so let's take that apart. What do you mean too trusting? Well, I always assume the good in people. Well, okay, so, what about these instances of people acting in a bad way? Well, I don't really understand that. It's okay, you start to see they need to differentiate up their worldview to take into account the existence of predatory people. And they also generally have to differentiate their view of themselves to stop thinking themselves as nice and harmless. Because it's the nice and harmless naive person that's exploitable by the malevolent psychopath. And that's not moral virtue, that's just weakness.
Weakness, I guess, is it's like a blunt word, isn't it? When you hear of someone, saying you're weak, it's kind of like you're bad. I guess what he's saying, or the way I'm interpreting what he's saying here, is that if you look at truth in the face, you look at yourself in the mirror, and you are weak, it's actually very liberating, because you know where you are. You're not like, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. It's like, hey, I am this, and I can now grow from this. And I think that's one of the best things you can learn from self-help books, and and people that have gone on to do very amazing, successful, positive things for themselves in the world, is that they were able to actually, listen to the truth and move on from their weaknesses, which would eventually become strengths. I think that was like a Michael Jordan idea, that he would work on his weaknesses all the time so they would become strengths, and then his previous strengths were then weaknesses, and then he had to work on those. So it was just this continual improvement in life, and that's kind of like what George Leonard speaks about in the book Mastery, where you're just continually improving on your skill. And I know that's a bit of a tangent from the psychological context here, but if you're just continually improving and continually recognizing where you're at, you're going to do some good.
It's the maintenance of a childlike viewpoint, a view of the world far past its expiry date.
Sometimes we do just have to grow up, which is rough, But it is fair, and when the unawakened Buddha, when he first left the castle, or as the story goes, this is Siddhartha Gautama, who founded Buddhism essentially, and when he first left the castle, he was terrified because of all of the suffering and the old people and the people with diseases and the people that didn't have what he had when he was growing up in the world. And his father, who was a prince, gave him all the riches and all the women and all of the food and the wealth. And when he first came out of that and saw the world as it was, he was terrified from the process of transcending that childlike mindset.
You formulate a more differentiated and sophisticated view of the world. The person finds that plausible. Then you have them practice it so they can see that it has applicability in the real world. And then the emotion from the traumatic memory will go away.
Once we devise a plan, we can move on, because we can visualize the plan and we can recognize, based on the way the trauma manifests cognitively. So trauma can manifest in all different sorts of ways. Trauma can be that feeling you get in your body, and that can cause a perpetual sort of system of thoughts to occur. But when it's thoughts and they're just going crazy and leading you to think all these bizarre things, it's not you, it's just these evolutionary systems that are trying to figure out what to do. So if we can devise a plan, those thoughts tend to dissipate, because it's like, okay, we know what we're doing now. And if that happens again, based on the how good the plan is, if it happens again, we can actually continue to move on.
Because what's happening is the anxiety system is saying, unexplored territory, unexplored territory, unexplored territory. And what that system wants is to know, A, that someone is trying to map that territory instead of just avoiding the problem, and B, that there is a plan. Now, it's not cognitively sophisticated enough in some way to know if the plan works. It wants to know that someone's in charge and that it's being taken care of. Well, so that's what you do in psychotherapy. You say, look, you can face this, even though you think you can't. You can. We'll break it into pieces. I'll discuss with you a plethora of potential solutions. We can do it slowly. You can bite off as much as you can chew and no more. And we're going to come up with something that isn't a rationalization for your behavior, a post hoc rationalization. It's a set of new tools so that you do not, when you see that hole in the road, you walk around it. First of all, you'll see it. Second, you'll walk around it. And people are massively encouraged by that process. They're not made less afraid. In fact, they might be made more afraid, but the fear is much more focused, and they know how to deal with it. It's like, I didn't think there were dangerous people in the world. Well, there are. Oh my God, the world's much more dangerous. It's like, yes, it is. Well, what am I going to do about that? You're going to get smarter and sharper, right? Because that's the cure. It's not, we're going to make the world less dangerous. The world is plenty dangerous, but it turns out that you're a lot more capable than you thought.
The world doesn't get less dangerous. It's just that we as individuals become braver and more courageous to take on the world and hopefully do some good, knowing that we've explored that unexplored territory. We've explored that territory, and our domain of the known has increased, so that we can actually venture forth again to explore the unknown. And hopefully that same sort of stuff doesn't occur, but if it does occur, then we know what we have to do. So that was great, and I hope you enjoyed it.